otherwise we're going to get so confused, because there are a million things you can do, and so you just have to perfect your own art, and hopefully there will be room for it.
Welcome to another episode of Live Coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. Tonight is episode 1 of a brand new series that we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. It is going to be the Vue Basics series that we've been talking about doing, and just going to cover the basics of Vue.js, talk about what it is not compared to React and Angular, and kind of just walk through how to get up and running and get started with the basic syntaxes of Vue.js. Cool. So let's say hi to people in the chat. Looks like we got Joseph and Joshua. So hey guys, how's it going? I hope you guys are having a wonderful evening. As always, glad to see you. So the plan for this series is, I think these live coding sessions are going to be about only about an hour. Just because of the fact that we just don't want to cover too much stuff in one session, give you a chance to absorb it. If you're learning Vue for the first time or are new to it, have a little bit of experience, and we're just going to play around and see if we can do some cool stuff. So kind of more of a chill stream. We don't have a total end goal project for this session. We're just going to be going, like I said, over the basics, a lot of just one-off examples and stuff like that. We'll talk about some documentation on it and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so intro to Vue.js. So what is Vue.js? All right, so if we go to the website, we can take a look and see what they say. Vue.js, the progressive JavaScript framework. And if you want, you can watch this little video. It says why Vue.js. Basically gives you a number of reasons on why you want to use Vue over some other framework. But basically you can see right here the main key points that they have. So approachable already. If you already know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's super beginner friendly, super easy. The learning curve isn't very extreme at all, and it's quite familiar with the Vue templating and stuff that's built into each component. When you get into the actual full-on framework, CLI project stuff and whatnot, so it's versatile. You can use as much or as little as you want with the framework. So it comes with a bunch of different stuff built in that you can choose when you're initializing a project through the Vue CLI, whether you want to use it, whether it be state management, using Vuex, using the router that they have built in Vue for making single page applications, and a couple other different stuff. That's a couple other different features that are for if you wanted to use like CSS preprocessors and stuff. It supports that as well. It supports both Babel and Webpack. And so there's a bunch of different cool options that they give you the availability to choose from, but you don't necessarily need it either. You don't need to, you can pick and choose what you want, so it's pretty nice. So progressive Vue.js is a progressive front-end framework for building single-page applications and full-feature applications, or small applications. You can basically make whatever you want with it. It's pretty flexible in that way. A lot of people say that it's a combination of Angular 1 and React.js. So with the vModel directive for data binding, and then React.js for the different templating and stuff, so, or the components and component-based ecosystem and whatnot that you build, and kind of the concepts of applications are built around these days. And another key point is it's super easy to get up and running with Vue for beginners and people that are getting just into JavaScript, or the best thing to do. Okay, really quick, we're gonna say that, like, if you have the question that what framework should I learn, or should I learn regular JavaScript, or should I learn Vue, or should I learn React, or what should I do? The best piece of advice I can give to that question is that you ultimately want to have a solid understanding and capability with just using vanilla JavaScript, because that's, in the end, that's what all of this stuff is built on anyways. So to know what it's doing under the hood and have a better understanding of why it's doing certain things and why you do certain stuff in specific ways will make more sense if you have a fundamental understanding of the core concepts of JavaScript as a programming language. And yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so basically what the point being is that instead of learning a framework first, I always recommend going and getting your JavaScript chops up to par, and then going through and figuring out which framework you want to learn, and check out and investigate. And there's tons of different frameworks out there, so feel free to explore them. The main big ones are Angular, React, and of course Vue. I wouldn't recommend using Angular. Not that there's anything wrong with Angular, it's actually pretty cool, but the learning curve for it is incredibly steep, especially because it requires you to program in TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, which we won't get into on this stream, but there's that. And then Angular, the new Angular stuff is still has kind of like the same separation of concerns so you'll have like a JS file, a CSS, or not a JS, a TypeScript file, and like a CSS file for each component. And then you'll also have like, everything is just broken out in a bunch of different files, so it can be really daunting and confusing. I tried learning Angular at first and it didn't go so well, and I was really confused and didn't really benefit from that whole experience. So don't do what I did, and I would suggest not choosing Angular for the first framework that you use. React is good too, but also React is really strict on, like, you need to know how to program in JavaScript in order to really make stuff effectively, or make it even work, because it utilizes key higher functions, such as higher order functions such as like map and filter and for each, mainly the map one, to like generate different components and stuff like that. So I would definitely recommend having a really good, solid, fundamental understanding of higher order functions if you're going to start out with React. But that all aside, Vue.js is my number one pick and recommendation for beginners starting out, because of the simple learning curve. It takes about, if you're just plugging it into any application, it takes about as long as it takes you to hit control or copy paste. Copy and paste in either the CDN tag for Vue.js or the actual minified JavaScript bundle itself. So we can demonstrate that later on in this episode, but for now we're going to keep talking about it. It's great for beginners because it's pretty unopinionated. It's super flexible. You can kind of make mistakes and it'll still kind of like work. And it makes it's, in my opinion, it's a bit more intuitive in a lot of ways for someone coming from traditional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into a framework for the first time. It's a lot easier of a transition to wrap your head around, in my opinion, than the other major frameworks out there. All right, cool. So and then so again, the props and components and props, that comes from the React.js land as well. You can pass data down through components, through props and whatnot. And then they also have these things called Vue directives, and that's basically different types of micro functions built into Vue that do certain things. So you have for instance, like a v-if directive you'll send or replace an expression in there or a value in there, and based on what that evaluates to, if it's true or false, it will display or render a component or element based on that truthiness or falsiness of that value. So that's kind of we'll talk about Vue directives more in depth probably next week on that stream. We'll go cover the main ones that you'll use all the time and what they're doing under the hood a little bit. Yeah, so what is the point? Okay, so what's the DOM though? So we always hear about what these frameworks are talking about, the DOM and the virtual DOM and whatnot, and so what exactly is that? Well, we have our HTML structure, right, that you're used to looking at, the document, essentially the HTML document. Well, the document object model is essentially an object model of the HTML document, so hence document object model. And that's basically saying that it's the JavaScript definition of an HTML web page. HTML elements are represented as objects. So if we were to look at, let's see, JavaScript DOM, let's see an image. So kind of what I have laid out right here. You can see kind of a visualization of that as far as the DOM tree, and it's, so you have the document, which is the top level. If we look at index.html, we can take a look and compare it. So document, that would be the upper HTML top level, or the root element, and that's basically what did the HTML, sorry, what's that? So the HTML tag is the root element technically, but it sits in the HTML. The doc type is basically telling what kind of document it is. So these two tags are like the root element. And then so you can see the head is its own thing, and it has in there, it'll have an element which is the title, and the title will have text and also have metadata for our web pages and any links to style sheets or JavaScript scripts and stuff like that in there as well. And then if you look, the next main tag is the body, and that is represented right here, and you can see that each element in there has its own tree structure as well. So this would have a div that contains an image, and then it also contains a header with a text node inside of there that says intro to Vue.js. So what's a node? What's a text node? Well, basically, let's see, this is a good example actually. So I'm gonna take a closer look at this. This is from the Mozilla Developer Network. We just want to take a look at this example of, so you have your basic HTML boilerplate right here, and then you have the document object model example of that. And you can see inside of these, each of these objects are these little hashtag text object thingies, and those are text nodes, and each element will have a text node built into it inherently. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind when you're working with the DOM and whatnot. And So basically everything in here is a node. You have the element node, root node, child node, descendant node, parent node, sibling nodes, and text nodes. So you don't need to worry about much of that unless you want to look into it, but that you don't need to understand this fully in order to really get up and running with Vue.js. But I would definitely recommend taking a look at this article and looking into the document object model as well. And I do have a link that you can check out, the JavaScript document object model in depth. Check that video out on YouTube. So anything that you can, the document object model allows us to interact with elements. We can add, remove, and update elements. And we can change any changeable item in the DOM is called a node. So like we were saying, full elements, text nodes of elements, HTML attributes, all this stuff is anything that we can target and change is a node. And that's basically a summary of the document object model. So in comparison, that's all good and fine. So when you're doing like stuff with so you have a to-do list and you need to add a click listener on each of those elements, each of the list items that are in that to-do list, but you don't have necessarily all of those list items in there right away because they'll be added and deleted dynamically. So you have to set an event listener on the parent node and have it listen on it's called traversing the DOM, and you traverse down to the child nodes and apply those event listeners on each of the child nodes from the parent node. So if you want to take a look at child, I would look into DOM traversal and event handling in JavaScript if you want to understand more of that and the caveats of working with that kind of stuff, because there are some gotchas with event bubbling and whatnot. So I would look into that, especially to get a solid understanding of the events in JavaScript. Cool. So that's pretty much what the DOM is. And so what is the virtual DOM? The virtual DOM is basically, you hear it a lot when you're talking about, or like a shadow DOM nowadays with like web components and whatnot. But a virtual DOM is basically a lightweight copy of the document object model, and it portrays a document object model representation in JavaScript data structure. So it sits between basically our front-end framework, so in this case Vue.js, and I think React has a virtual DOM as well. So it sits in between the real DOM and our framework, and basically when we do change updates and when we do any type of event or change any type of data in our application, it will run a diff algorithm against the updated virtual DOM and the real DOM, and it pulls the differences out on what has changed, and it runs through the real DOM and updates the value of the content of the changed element versus reloading the whole page. So it'll only change like a text string or a number or something like that based on what has changed on the virtual DOM. And the main reason for this is that DOM manipulation is pretty expensive as far as computationally speaking, and so if we're changing a ton of stuff and like traversing and refreshing and reloading all of these elements on the page just for one single like text span of text or something like that, then that's a lot of overkill, a lot of overhead processing power and computation that it takes to do that over and over again for such a small result. So what it does is it changes what the item in the virtual DOM, and then it'll also, when it runs the diff on that virtual DOM, it'll figure out what it needs to change on the actual DOM and go ahead and change that versus just running through the whole DOM, the real DOM, because that would take up too much computational power. So I hope that makes sense. it doesn't really do all that much when you have a really small application and not a whole lot going on, but when you have it becomes more apparent and more effective in large scale applications. And it looks like Ian is in the chat tonight, so let's say hi to Ian. He runs his own channel on YouTube, and he also has a Discord and web development course for the complete web developer course. Let me double check the actual. Oh, the Web Developer Bootcamp is the actual name. So it's pretty good resource if you want to learn and get all of your skills that we're talking about here up to par. Go check out his stuff as well, because he does a great job of explaining and really breaking things down in a clear and understandable way. So props to you, Ian. Thanks for showing up tonight. That's awesome. Glad to see you. We're just going over some basics on Vue.js and kind of just talking about some concepts right now, and then we'll do a little bit of examples after that. So Vue.js is a reactive framework, and so what exactly is reactivity? And again, I have a link in the markdown file if you want to take a look at that on the repo, and it is basically reactivity explained via Vue.js. And the guys over at Vue Mastery, they take an example and kind of break it down on what's going on behind the scenes in a reactivity based application, like something built in Vue. So it's pretty cool. It's really interesting. It's kind of intermediate skill level for understanding what's going on, but I would definitely take a look at it just for the heck of it. So reactivity in a nutshell is an abstracted way of keeping functions and data up to date with inputs and changes based on the get set pattern for Vue.js. And it abstracts away functions and data that would otherwise be overly reused. And updates any data or DOM properties dependent on that specific variable. So it stores, basically it'll have like a temporary storage type of array or class, and inside of there it's going to store our functions that we set up throughout our Vue instances. Each Vue instance has its own storage bin essentially, and instead of running, what we do to get the updated values is when something does change, one of our data objects or properties does change, it goes into that storage bin and finds the function that is associated with getting that value, and it updates and returns the updated value from that. It's hard to explain. Basically, check out the video that I linked, because they do a really good job of visually illustrating what's going on. But in a nutshell, it's kind of what's going on. It's basically just holding your functions and data and stuff in a temporary storage bin, and then when something changes, it runs all that stuff and compares it and makes sure that it returns the updated values of anything that needs to be changed to our Vue instance. All right, so next question we had was why do we need a framework? Well, why do we need a framework in the first place? And I have a quick video again that I linked in the markdown file for this if you want to take a look at that. But basically, it's a framework helps productivity for building applications and stuff like this tenfold, like a millionfold in a lot of cases, because it is under the hood, it is a lot of boilerplate stuff that is just there to keep things, or just there for the functionality of what you're trying to do in the first place. So that's stuff that you would, if you were trying to do all of this, through vanilla JavaScript, it's totally possible, but you're gonna end up, it's gonna take you way longer, and it's gonna require a much higher level of skill in JavaScript programming in general to be able to build one of these larger frameworks, just because there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to consider. But some value or some optimized stuff that we get from, benefits that we get from using a framework like Vue.js is it's optimized and battle tested code. Basically, that means that it'll just work. You know, they have huge teams of developers working on these projects, and to make them as awesome and as efficient as possible. And a lot of those people working on these projects are way smarter than I ever hoped to be. So I'll leave this kind of deep programming to them and just make awesome stuff with the tools that they've given us. So built-in functionality helps increase development tenfold, because it takes care of a lot of the monotony of vanilla JavaScript in order to do a lot of this stuff. A lot of it is based on the document.create element functionality of the DOM API, and if you've ever worked with that, it can be very verbose very quickly. So having all that kind of stuff abstracted away from you into some sort of like easy to read, simple framework makes things a lot cleaner overall, and it makes things a lot more understandable, and gives you the ability to make applications that would normally be out of the reach of your skill level at this point in time, or my skill level at least. I mean, you can be wherever you are. So okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is understand and know the fundamentals of JavaScript. And so we want to understand, like we've been saying, understand the fundamentals of JavaScript, then learn how to use these frameworks, understand the process behind the magic, figure out what's going on underneath the hood, and be able to like break down some of the source code and like understand what it's doing, so you know the benefits that it's serving to you. Vanilla JavaScript is really nice and has come a long way with all the language updates and whatnot, and it's really fun to use. But for projects that require more so of a finite control over lots of components and files and just a big application, then a framework really helps to kind of keep things in line for you. So I hope that makes sense. So we can talk about Vue versus other frameworks. React versus Angular versus Vue is a video that I have on here linked to by Academind, the YouTube channel, and he talks a little bit about the differences between them, and not like which one's best and which one's the worst, but like what the benefits and the drawbacks of React versus Angular versus Vue. And we've kind of talked about that a little bit over the course of this session, so I won't go into too much detail about that. Plus, I haven't really used Angular all that much other than the first experience that I shared about at the beginning of the stream, so I can't really speak on that other than it's just I know that Angular is used for large scale enterprise level applications and huge code bases and stuff. It's interesting in its own way, but yeah, so I don't have all that much experience, but I've been learning React, and more specifically I guess React Native, the last few months, working on Coding Garden project, community app project, which has been a lot of fun. And definitely know one of the main things that I've found to be true is that once you kind of understand how one of these reactive frameworks work, then learning another one is like not even a challenge for you. If you understand one, then learning another one is pretty easy to do after that. So I picked up React fairly quickly because I understood kind of what was going on with the concepts of that were introduced to me through using Vue.js. So kind of one way or the other, vice versa. It can work all the ways, but I do know that, like we were saying earlier, is that Vue has less of a learning curve and it's more beginner friendly than getting a project up and running with React. So that being said, we can actually take a look at some Vue stuff now and play around a little bit and see if we can do, I don't know, get a couple examples going of just kind of why, or right away what we can see the power of Vue will do. So how do we get started with Vue? So there's a couple ways you can do it. If we look at my index.html, you can add in, so we just have a basic, pretty much just a basic boilerplate. I just have a div with flexbox and the Vue logo and a header in there. And if we wanted to apply Vue to this project, you can download at Vue's website, you can download the minified bundle. You can either download the development version, which comes unminified and it has all the errors and everything built into it as far as you need for development, or you can also get the production bundle, and that has, it's minified, it's gzipped, and it's got all the errors removed and stuff for production level code. And yeah, so what we can do is the easiest way to get started with Vue is you can actually just link to a CDN link if we want. So if we go, and we can just go into, I think I actually have it in my clipboard somewhere. Let's take a look. Here it is. Okay, so if we want, I can just plug it into the head right here. And we want to make sure with Vue, we want to make sure we put it in the head, because we want Vue to load before the rest of the document. So what we can do is, if we want to just say link, and then it will be, or no, not link, it's script. If I can type script. Okay, so script source equals, let me fix this tag really quick, and then we can just bring our CDN link into here. And if you just Google, or go to Google and type in Vue CDN, it's like, you can get it from like the first result, and usually you'll just want the normal version, Vue.min.js, so the minified version. The rest of the stuff is just like for specific development purposes. So I would only worry about the minified version. You can just pop that in the source tag, or the source attribute of the script tag, and get up and running like that. So the next thing we can do is, now that we have that going, we can open up and initialize a Vue instance. And if I wanted to do the same thing, instead of linking to a CDN, we could just link to our actual Vue bundle that we have downloaded in our project. So I think for this point I'll do that, since we have it locally and we don't need to hit a server to get Vue at this point. All right, now that we have Vue in there, and we can make some changes and get a Vue instance built up. So with that, we can write a script tag underneath it, and open and close, just like that is all we need to do. And we can say, let's take a look. So if we're saying getting started, there's a couple things that we need to do. We just need to initialize a variable as a new Vue instance. There's two things, or at least one thing that we need if we're working with Vue.js in this way, just as kind of like a plugin version. We need the element that it's targeting, so it knows which element that we're going to be working with. So what I can say is in this div right here, we can give this an ID of app. ID equals app. Just like that. Cool. And then, so now we can target that ID and start making changes through Vue into our application. Everything inside of this div here is now going to be targeted and turned into our Vue instance. And all right, so let's do this. So we can say const app equals new Vue, and that is a class. So we're creating a new instance of it, and it receives an object that we just open up right away. And the object inside of here is essentially our Vue instance. Is where we're going to hold all of our data and all of our methods. Anything that we're going to do through Vue will be inside of this Vue instance. So to start out, like the documentation is saying, is that we need to set up the L at least, and that's going to tell, again, Vue.js what element on our document object model to take over or instantiate as a Vue instance or a Vue component, I guess you could call it. So we'll say L, and that will be it's for this case, for when we're typing it in, since it's an ID, we need to include the ID sim or the hashtag or the ockathorpe or whatever inside of this string. So we can't just type out app because that won't find it. We need to tell Vue that it is an ID of app. So element is the ID of app, which is our div. And that should be all there is to it for getting it up and running. And so the next thing let's add is some data. So we can actually extract this title right here into our Vue instance and update it dynamically. Or reactively, I guess. Yeah, so we need to say data. And in this case, since we're just having we're just having Vue inline like this, and it's not a single page application or like a single file component. It doesn't need data. Data can just be an object in this case. We don't need to turn it into a function that returns a new object containing our data like we would if we were building this as a spa. So we can just create an object like that, and we can say title is going to be intro to Vue.js. I guess we could say, okay, so yeah, just like that. And so now, instead of having this, let's pull up our website really quick. Let's see what's broken. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, so if we have, oh, there we go. That was weird. Okay, no worries. So now with this Vue instance set up, we can just get rid of that, and instead of having that hard-coded value in there as the header text, we can just enter in something from our data. And since we have a variable in our Vue instance, we can use what is known as mustache, or double curly brackets, or string interpolation. And so basically that can allow us to dynamically insert variable values into our application through this syntax. So you can see right here it says message equals hello Vue, and in this div they're putting it in, they're inserting that into the object right here, or the string interpolation. Okay, so we can show that basically right here. So it takes the two curly braces just like that to tell Vue that it's looking for a variable on our data or in our Vue instance. And we can just say the name of it just like that. So if we say title, then it should pop up on here. Maybe if I don't break it. Did I goof something up? I don't think so. It should be in there like that, but I wonder if we delete all this stuff. It should just be in there though. I don't understand why something's not. Oh, Vue warning cannot find element app. I think we need to put this script at the bottom actually. Let me try that really quick. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, okay, my bad. It's been a while since I've used Vue in this way. So the syntax is that the Vue bundle goes on the top in the head, and then the actual Vue instance script tag will go underneath everything at the bottom of the before the closing body tag. So that way it processes the DOM and it can figure out which app it needs to target after it knows everything. It's aware of everything that's there. So my bad. Or he's saying we can just defer it to, or Joseph in the chat was saying we can just defer it, but since we're focusing on complete beginners in this series, we're not going to worry about stuff like that. And he was saying that if we want to do that right there, sets defer the indicate, this Boolean attribute is set to indicate to the browser that the script is meant to be executed after the document has been parsed but before firing DOM content loaded event. So that makes sense. If we just have that in there, then if we put this back up to the very top, or not very top, but right after our Vue source, then it should pop up all the same. Maybe we might need to do async. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, let's see. Yeah, it's not working. But that's alright. So we're not going to do that, but let's move this back down to the bottom because that's how it's recommended. By Vue. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's see. Let's back up here just a minute. I want my image back in here. Going all the way back just for that. All right, bring this script back all the way down. I'll bring it, oops, not that. All right, cool. Give it a little bit of breathing room. All right, neat. So we can see that after all of that stuff, it's back up and functioning. So that's pretty neat. And what happened to my? Oh, because it's 20%. That's right. Okay, cool. Makes sense. Intro to Vue.js. So this is the neat part about stuff with Vue, because it's just a lot of fun, because you can see it's pretty easy to get up and running. And so if we wanted to change this really quick, we can just say like that, and it automatically updates in the DOM just like that, and we don't have to do anything more than that. And we can do other things, like if we were to have, so for an example, we could say name, which is an object, and we'll have first. So you've probably seen this example before, but if you haven't, then it's all good. I'll show you right now. So if we had just like a first and a last, let's go like this, RabbitWerks. Anyways, oops, let's not escape that. All right, so we have name object, and it has a first and a last name, and we have that. So we could just say name dot first, and we could also say name dot second, or not second, last. Just like that. So you can see, and then so this just treats it as just if it were a string, so we can take a look at that. So we just need to add a space in here. So that's in there. Let's take a look and see what it says. So it just says, as it were, it just renders as it were, just text nodes, and which is pretty neat. And I think we can if we console log, if we say document get element. I do like the updates that Chrome has done to their dev tools with this auto completion stuff. It makes using their console like a million times better, just because it's more or less cuts down on typing. All right, so we want to pull in app. I just want to see what it says really quick. App has already been declared. Oops, can't use that one. Let's see, we can just say VM. So if we want to target it in the console, we can take a look at it by, usually the syntax is, or the convention is to just declare it as VM, or virtual model, or machine, or I don't know why they call it VM, to be honest. Vue Instance. But anyways, so let's declare that, and I just want to see what that gives us. It gives us that. All right, we don't have that. I want to see if we log app. Okay, there we go. So since we have it declared right here in our script, we can just log it out right away. Take a look at, and this is actually, you can see our Vue instance. So we have all this neat stuff in here. It's a lot of stuff. So you can go in here and take a look at everything that it has available to look at. A lot of the stuff you'll be looking for is the refs and children and L sometimes, but usually you won't need to come in here for anything. But if you do want to get a better understanding or dive in a little bit of Vue and figure out what's going on underneath the hood, this is a good place to start. And if you just want to immerse yourself and stuff. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting. It has our data object right here, you can see. So we'll have to take a look. And if we click on, since this is the getter and setter pattern, since it has get name, get title, set title for our data properties in our Vue instance, which we won't go into too much tonight, but which we won't cover tonight because it is kind of more of an in-depth thing for that getter and setter pattern to explain, and it's not necessarily need to know knowledge to get started. So if you just click for now, you can see if you're in your data instance, or if you log data for any reason, you can always just click that little this little parentheses and the more sign right there, and it'll show you what the evaluated values are. So that's pretty neat too, like that. And you can see it has options. It's got data, directives, if you have any directives that you've built, filters if you've written any filters, all that stuff, which we've talked about in previous series, which we'll go through and talk about directives and filters probably next week, and a little bit more in depth and whatnot. So another thing, before anything else, before we wrap up for tonight, I think one more thing I want to try and explain is computed properties, and just like scratching the surface on computed properties. Because when I first started using Vue, although it kind of made sense, it didn't really click until I actually started just making them and doing it and figuring it out. Because the examples I was looking at were just difficult to understand, I guess, in context. But so I'm going to do my best to explain that right now. So computed properties are essentially properties on our Vue instance, much like our data properties, but they get the values of those properties get computed as, instead of just being like hard-coded stuff right here. So for instance, if we had the easiest way to explain this is you can see that we have name.first and name.last, and to make our first and last name our full name, then we need to make these two different strings interpolation things. So there's got to be an easier way to do that. Well, there is, and we can use a computed property to pull the values out of our name.first and our name.last, process them in whatever way we want, and then return that value as essentially a new property on our data object. After computed properties get evaluated and their values get returned, Vue essentially treats it as it were just right on our data property. So let's see how that works. So we can go computed, and computed is an object, and in here, just make sure we don't forget our comma. In this object is where we can set up different, they're like functions that'll run, they're functions that'll run and process what we want to do and return the new updated result of that process. So in this case, we're going to write a function or a computed property called full name, and we can do camel case, and this is going to be an so we instantiate it like that because it's a function, and we need to give it a body, right? So full name is going to return, all we need to do is just return this dot name dot first plus, and actually instead of doing it like this, because we'll have to account for the space by going like that, but instead of doing that, we're going to use template strings. So we can just say return, and in here we can say this dot name dot first, and then another one for our last name, this dot name dot last, just like that. And you can see so now if we take a look and change this out, and we can just drop this property name or a computed property right in there as it were a data property on our data instance. So we can put it inside of a set of handlebars, double handlebars, double curly brackets, and if we were to say full name, and just like that. And you don't need to invoke it since it's being invoked down here, and it runs and returns that computed property and it caches that value. So essentially it's in a variable. It would be essentially the same thing if we were to say full name on here is RabbitWerks, like that. But why would you do that when you can compute that value and just have that all the time instead of having to like make a separate property for that and then have it hard coded and then have to go in and change that? So it's less maintainable, and this is a much easier way to do it. So I hope that makes sense a little bit. We can also do stuff like, if we wanted to run JavaScript on this, we could capitalize it. So we could say dot to uppercase, just like that. And you can see it runs just like that. That's okay. So these things, this thing right here, this string template, this isn't something that's specific. This isn't something that's specific to Vue. This is something that's specific to JavaScript or ECMAScript 2015 language update, so ES6. It's basically just a new way of working with strings, variables with strings and stuff, versus having to like concatenate a ton of different variables together and spaces in between those variables. This is a much cleaner and a more elegant way to do it. Plus you can run JavaScript in it all the same. So I think it's much easier. So just to be clear that this string interpolation is not anything to do with Vue or this string interpolation. So this is template literals or string literals in ES6, and this is string interpolation in Vue.js. I hope that makes sense. So we're about an hour in, and I think that is going to do it for tonight. We just kind of scratched the surface on getting started with Vue.js. You can take with what you've started to what we started to learn here tonight and get the ball rolling on some stuff and see what we can make and some cool stuff. So yeah, next week we'll go into more depth about all the different properties on our Vue instance. So we have the data computed, we also have watchers, which are kind of confusing, we also have methods, and we also have these things called lifecycle hooks. So more stuff we'll cover next week, and we also talk about Vue directives as well, and get a few more examples built up. So if you like this video and you learned a lot, give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, that would be super cool too. Whatever you want to do. Thank you so much for tuning into RabbitWerks JavaScript. As always, music was brought to us again by the RabbitWerks Code Beats Spotify playlist, which the link is in the description for, and all the links that I have that we talked about in this session will be covered or uploaded to GitHub and to the project repository, so you can go take a look at that. If you want to watch the videos that I have linked in the README or the markdown file. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on the RabbitWerks Discord server, which will be linked in the description as well. So you can, if you have any questions about getting up and running with Vue.js, feel free to reach out and we'll do our best to help you. And without anything else, I think that'll do it. So thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Live Coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. And no matter where the moon or sun is in the sky where you're at right now, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay awesome and have a good week, everybody. If I can find the arrow. There we go. Can see you later. Thanks for tuning in, guys and gals and everybody.